Thanks for coming out today, guys. Today, our talk's going to be focused on MicroStrategy and their Bitcoin strategy. So they're a business intelligence software company led by Michael Saylor when they adopted this. And in 2020 of August, they became the first publicly traded company to adopt Bitcoin as its primary reserve treasury asset. And here to talk about MicroStrategy, we got the pleasure of CJ from Harvard joining us. He's also works on the MicroStrategy treasury board or treasury side of things. And he was a former private equity associate at Blackstone. So a lot of wealth of knowledge and experience. And thanks for coming out, CJ.
Thanks a lot for having me, Michael. Excited to chat about Bitcoin and MicroStrategy with you.
Awesome. So I want to start out with a little bit of your background. So we know your work experience, but what about your Bitcoin background? Like what was it that got you interested in Bitcoin?
Yep, happy to share that story. So as you mentioned, I was working in private equity back in India in Blackstone, in Mumbai, same hometown, born and raised over there, spent my entire life out there. And this was during the bubble in 2021, where all stocks in India globally were ripping, crypto was ripping. And I had my high school friends who I used to hang out with occasionally talking about how much money they're making trading crypto. And I was wondering to myself, I work in private equity, in investing, and I should understand how to make more money than them. And just out of pure greed and some curiosity, I started looking into crypto. And I remember crypto advertisements of these different crypto exchanges were also popping up everywhere at the time. In India too, a lot of cricket games were being sponsored by crypto exchanges. And one day while watching some cricket game, I just right then and there downloaded some crypto exchange app and I bought a bunch of Dogecoin. And I think it was one day before Elon Musk was going on Saturday Night Live to pump it. And that was my entry. So pure greed, some high school friends, and some interest in crypto. But that got my foot in the door. I had a senior at work who had some interest in crypto as well, and he guided me to some Twitter accounts that I should be following. And these are all crypto accounts that would talk about crypto trading and finding the right crypto for each cycle and whatnot. But that was my entry where I got into crypto Twitter, and crypto Twitter helped me find Bitcoin Twitter and these debates on Bitcoin versus crypto, proof of work versus proof of stake. And I just got really interested in all of these things. At the same time, I was going to apply for my MBA sort of applications, and I was thinking crypto can be a good differentiator. So I wanted to go deep and really understand crypto well. But that motivation and crypto Twitter really helped me narrow down on the Bitcoin podcast. So Bitcoin Twitter helped me find Bitcoin podcasts. I found Preston Pish's podcast, which I absolutely loved. He would approach it from the value investing, macro investing lens, which I find like I could resonate with that approach. And yeah, then I think just like a lot of people who have their own Bitcoin journeys, I was just falling down the rabbit hole, listening to Bitcoin podcasts every night, late night after work, and just kept reading more and more about it. Loved reading Saifedean Ammous's stuff, listening to his podcasts, Michael Saylor, GG, Preston Pish, Pierre Rochard, and now here I am. I'm just became the crazy Bitcoin guy in all my social circles with friends, with family, at work, and here at Harvard as well.
Yeah, so now you're at Harvard, and those references I'm talking about Twitter, Preston Pish, all these podcasts. A lot of those, it's funny that it's the same ones we put on our slides. So I think that's the best way to learn about it. There's just so much content, podcasts, books. But you're going to Harvard, and you have a lot of opportunity there as a Harvard MBA, and you chose to focus on Bitcoin and take a role with MicroStrategy over the summer. So what was your thought process there, and how'd that come about?
Yeah, so that was in hindsight almost an easy decision in terms of not wanting to go down the traditional finance and investing route and wanting to go all in on my Bitcoin passion. And I thought, the MBA is a perfect time to be a bit more experimental with the summer, find an internship in the space that I find really interesting. I had a lot of friends from different backgrounds who were also equally passionate about like different areas and were again taking a gamble of some sorts. So I approached the whole MBA with that mindset that this is my chance to shift from India to the US, explored the Bitcoin ecosystem here in the US. I was first a bit underwhelmed because at Harvard itself, I didn't find any ecosystem for Bitcoin. There was some interest in crypto with some other peers and students, but nothing that was focused narrowly on Bitcoin. So I just kind of took that gamble where January onwards, I remember what I was doing was I was just spamming everyone on Twitter, left, right, and center, everyone I was following at the time that this is my background. I have a deep interest in Bitcoin, and can you just share some career advice with me on, what should I do next? And through just a lot of fortunate turn of events, I got connected with the MicroStrategy team, and I was kind of pestering them to allow me to intern for them. And just got fortunate, got lucky through the process where a spot happened to open up in their team. The timing worked out well, and they sort of created this internship program for me. So I got to work in their treasury team, the capital markets team, and yeah, it was a great experience overall. And I'm also continuing that now part-time remotely during the second year of the MBA at Harvard. So it's going extremely well so far.
Well, congrats. And so now diving into the MicroStrategy, were you familiar with their whole story prior to going in? And can you give just an overall background of what they did in 2020 and their thought process behind it?
Of course. So I was aware. I would say my journey down the Bitcoin rabbit hole consisted a lot of Michael Saylor podcasts. And I had just heard so much about the strategy from these different podcasts. And I think Preston Fish also does a great job covering the strategy. I also think it was a journey where I kept learning more and more as time went by. And I was very well aware by the time my MBA started that MicroStrategy is where I would, love to focus my efforts to get an internship over there. And yeah, speaking on the history of the strategy, which is obviously very interesting and very unique, and it's been covered in depth in a lot of different places online, but I'll do my best in giving a short version of it. So I think what's most important to understand the MicroStrategy Bitcoin journey is first acknowledging the fact that a lot of it is path dependent in terms of the history of MicroStrategy as a company for the last 25, 30 years, the history of Michael Saylor as a founder and his different experiences and what he learned from them. All of this, I think, combined led them to finding Bitcoin in 2020. But the very quick history over there is that MicroStrategy started off as this, let's say, business intelligence data analytics company in the late 80s, was super successful in the 90s, 2000s. It unfortunately was one of the poster boys of this dot-com bubble, and the stock crashed 99.8% or so during the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, 2002. But I think that experience was very pivotal in shaping Michael Saylor's philosophy on how he wants to run this company in the future. And what happened is, while they kept being innovative and they kept trying to figure out the next wave to catch in technological trends, what to capitalize on, and they were very open and inquisitive that way. But secondly, more importantly, he also built this philosophy of not wanting to decapitalize the company ever, keeping cash on the balance sheet of the company, um, so that they never have a liquidity issue, so that if the stock ever tanks, they could also buy it back. And these different things combined led to a lot of accumulation of cash on the balance sheet through the 2010s. And then you enter 2020 and COVID hits, and central banks globally drop their treasury, drop the yield down to zero, basically. And now MicroStrategy is this company that has about $500 million of revenue, $17 million of cash flow each year, and they've accumulated $500 million of cash on the balance sheet, and this cash is yielding nothing. And in that moment, they could either return the cash to shareholders, which they didn't want to do, uh, or they could look for some ways of investing the cash. There was perhaps nothing to invest within the business itself. They could have done some risky M&A, which has a lot of different conditions, risks associated with that. The third was to find a way to actually invest the cash. And that's when I think Michael Saylor went through this personal journey by himself and with the larger management team and the board at the company, where they all educated themselves on Bitcoin step by step as they were trying to find this asset to invest in. And I think over the course of 3 to 6 months, they fully understood what Bitcoin is. They understood that they can sort of, almost out of desperation at that stage, use Bitcoin as a way to protect the company and protect the shareholders of the company, protect the employees of the company. And that's how the Bitcoin journey started in August 2020, where they invested most of the $500 million into Bitcoin. And from that point on, it became a bit more opportunistic and eventually a lot more strategic, where It's not just investing the cash flows and the cash on the balance sheet of the company into Bitcoin, but also going out into the capital markets, raising more equity, raising more debt, and buying Bitcoin with it. So it's a very active, levered Bitcoin strategy, which I mean, the track record speaks for itself. For the last 4 years, it's been super successful.
Yeah, the most successful I saw Nvidia for some periods would outperform it, but now it's still MicroStrategy. And you're talking about like the different ways they would originally it was just based on the cash flow, but then they started getting creative with leverage. Was that discussed at all, like in your role on the treasury team, or can you go more in depth of their thought process of what tools do we have to get the most Bitcoin we can?
Yeah, of course. And I think Michael Saylor also delivered this fantastic presentation in Nashville over the summer where he spoke about like the Bitcoin strategy for individuals, corporates, nation states, and what are the different levers that each kind of stakeholder can use. How can you go from being a normie to a maxi to a triple maxi? And for a company, I think the way that works is, as you said, one, you can just put the cash or the annual cash flows, you can invest all of it into Bitcoin. That kind of makes you a Bitcoin maxi. But you can take it up a couple of notches and you can be like this triple maxi, which is you don't just invest the cash flows and cash uh, into Bitcoin that you're generating organically, but you are also then going out into the capital markets. You can issue equity and you can raise proceeds and you can buy Bitcoin with all the equity raised. Or two, you can raise debt and you can again invest all the proceeds into Bitcoin, and you can raise different kinds of debt. So you can raise senior secured debt, you can raise junk debt, you can raise convertible debt. And with MicroStrategy, you'll observe that the way the strategies evolved over the last 4 years, MicroStrategy has issued a lot of convertible debt. Just this year, I think they've issued 4 different tranches of convertible debt. And the way to understand this is it's long tenure debt that is unsecured. The Bitcoin is not posted as collateral, and it is extremely low cost because the feature of a convertible debt is that you're effectively packaging a bond and a call option on your stock together. And if your stock is super volatile because you are holding Bitcoin on your balance sheet, that makes the option super volatile because as volatility goes up, the price or the value of an option goes up because it's more likely to be in the money. And now when you're valuing the combined package of the option and the debt, if the option is super valuable, then you're able to command a very low cost on your debt. So for $4 billion, $5 billion of debt on MicroStrategy's balance sheet, the effective blended interest rate is less than 1%, which makes it effectively the best way to have a levered Bitcoin strategy. Because let's say you and or I, as an individual, we want to buy Bitcoin because we are maxis, and we want to take some reasonable amount of leverage because we think that Bitcoin will outperform the cost of debt that we could get. The question is, what is the cost of debt that you can get? As private individuals, like we'll get some 5, 10, 15, 20% of debt maybe, depending on what are we giving as collateral, where are we getting the debt from. The question is, can you get debt cheaper than what MicroStrategy can get it at? And if not, then perhaps that is the right smart way of playing the levered strategy, because as a shareholder of MicroStrategy, what you're effectively signing up for is a levered Bitcoin asset that MicroStrategy holds.
Yeah, we got a question here.
Hey, thanks for joining today. So for the convertible, what is the strike price? Because it sounds like the stock's been doing phenomenal. So I figure if it goes into the money, then your effective cost of debt is pretty expensive.
Yeah, so if I heard that correctly, you were asking about the conversion price for these different convertible debt. Is that correct?
Right. How close is it right now? Because if it goes in the money, then that's a concern.
He's saying if there's a concern if it goes in the money.
Yeah. So first, I would say that it's not a concern if the convertible debt becomes in the money. The intent or motivation behind issuing the convertible debt, let's say today, is that one, you could go out and issue equity and just buy Bitcoin with the equity. This also makes a lot of sense because if your equity is trading at a premium to your underlying Bitcoin holding market value, then each time you issue equity and buy Bitcoin with it, the effective rate of increase in your Bitcoin holdings outpaces the increase in the number of shares that are outstanding. And as a result, your Bitcoin per share goes up. And this can always be thought of as Bitcoin yield. So that is what happens when you issue equity, when your equity is trading at a premium to the Bitcoin, let's say NAV. When you issue convertible debt, you're taking it up a notch where for most of MicroStrategy's convertible debt, they were issued at a 40%, they were issued with the conversion price at a 40% premium to their share price as of that time. So if you would have issued equity, you would have raised money at your current share price. If you issue convertible debt, you're effectively raising money at a 30 or 40% premium to your share price at that point in time, which is already at a premium to the Bitcoin holdings. And more importantly, will only dilute the shareholders at a future date, let's say 5, 6, 8 years in the future, when the the bonds are in the money, when the option is exercised and the debt converts from convertible debt to common shares outstanding.
It's amazing, the triple maxi strategy. I'm jealous. What would you say are kind of the major risks you all would look out for, and how do you navigate that and protect yourself?
Yeah, so I think, of course, the big risk is if you're ever taking leverage to buy anything, then you have the risk or chances of being over levered and effectively becoming underwater. So the way MicroStrategy thinks of the risk or balances the risk is that the amount of leverage or the amount of debt on the balance sheet of MicroStrategy as a percentage of the Bitcoin holdings is roughly in the range of 20 to 30 to 40%. So it's not a high amount of leverage. And second, and more importantly, as I mentioned earlier, it is unsecured debt. So it's not as if there can ever be a margin call because the price of Bitcoin is volatile in the interim. All that matters is that if, let's say, the debt has a maturity of 6 years or 8 years, then as long as Bitcoin does not crash 60, 70, 80% and stay there for the next 6 to 8 years, you will not be in a position where you have more debt than your assets, and hence you'll never have a solvency issue. So just to sum it up, the way the risk of leverage is managed is, one, just have a reasonable amount of leverage. Second, have it be unsecured, have it be long term, and just manage your liabilities constantly. So that is at least the risk on the leverage. With regards to Bitcoin risk, I think all of us being Bitcoin maxis kind of have the perspective that over the long term, as long as you have a hold of greater than 4 years or 5 years, Bitcoin will remain the best performing asset. And this is a strategy that has worked for the last 4 years. I have a high degree of confidence it continues to work in the future as well. And yeah, that's it. You just effectively keep buying more and more Bitcoin. You keep finding more and more creative ways of issuing different kinds of liabilities, equity or debt, and buying more Bitcoin with it. And as long as your Bitcoin per share is increasing, your shareholders are effectively getting more and more Bitcoin each time you're executing this creative liability structure. And it just keeps working again and again.
Awesome. And then another thing I wanted to touch on is a lot of people were very bearish on MicroStrategy now that the Bitcoin ETFs are approved. So why do you think, what's the key value proposition for MicroStrategy when people can go and just buy paper Bitcoin through the ETF product?
Yeah, of course. That's a good question. And I think the MicroStrategy team themselves have done a great job in explaining this as well. If anyone ever wants to go more in depth, I would strongly suggest just listening to the recordings of their earnings presentations from Q1, Q2 this year after the spot ETFs were launched. And the idea is that if you buy the spot ETF, let's say issued by BlackRock, Fidelity, any of those big institutions, yes, you're buying a unit that is backed by Bitcoin, but you're paying a fee for it. And the management fee might be very, very small, might be, let's say, 10 bips. But over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you're effectively signing up to pay 1, 2, 3% fee to the issuer to sort of manage this product for you. Whereas with MicroStrategy, you have no fee that you're paying as a shareholder. Instead, MicroStrategy has a robust software business that continues to operate, that continues to generate cash flows. And the way to think of it is now, instead of a fee, it's actually an inverse of a fee where the cash flows are accruing to you as the shareholder. So it's almost a negative fee. But second, and more importantly, MicroStrategy is an operating company that can manage their liabilities and can do all these creative things that we were talking about, which is issue more equity, issue more debt, do different things opportunistically. And all of these things effectively end up increasing the Bitcoin per share for the company as a whole, for all the shareholders. And because of this active levered way of managing the Bitcoin, managing the liabilities, and this is what makes it uniquely different. So where if you're buying a spot ETF product, you just have your 1:1 Bitcoin and you're paying a fee all the time. Whereas with MicroStrategy, your Bitcoin effectively is increasing, your Bitcoin per share is going up. It's an operating company that can also continue to innovate and develop different things on Bitcoin. And it's almost like a VC bet in that state, in that sense that something might click and something might explode in terms of the scale. And even if it doesn't do that, you have an unrelated, uncorrelated software business that will continue to generate cash flows, which acts as a negative fee almost.
So that I definitely see any business that has the just positive cash flows could adopt this strategy and create a superior, a very unique product for investors. Why don't you think more other companies have adopted a similar strategy?
Yeah, so I think that was a question on everyone's mind through the last cycle, that if the MicroStrategy strategy makes so much sense, then how come, companies and founders aren't jumping around everywhere copying it? Again, I think a lot of it comes down to that path dependency on all the experiences of the company and the founder, Michael Saylor, led up to that high conviction decision being made then. And the same amount of conviction just did not kind of come about for other founders. My personal belief was that a lot of these tech companies led by founders who have dual classes of shares, who have voting power of their company, even if it's been listed for many, many years, they could be the kind of company that takes this step. You did see that with Jack Dorsey and Block to some extent, where it was a tech company led by a founder. They started putting their profits into Bitcoin. And that I think will just keep going up and up, where more companies will do it. I personally have started thinking back to my private equity experience. I think private equity run companies are prime candidates for the strategy as well, where the way the structure over there works is you have the private equity fund, which is managed by the GP, which is effectively the people running, let's say, the fund or the investment company, and they're raising capital from different limited partners or LPs. But the strategy is effectively run all by the GPs. They have complete voting control. They have complete sort of executive power over what happens with the capital. So as these different fund managers start getting convinced on the Bitcoin strategy, and today maybe very few of them are or none of them are, but as they get orange pilled one by one, and as these people managing large amounts of capital and having full executive power over that capital, understand what's happening with MicroStrategy, understand why the strategy makes sense, then these different funds investing into private companies and public companies will start bringing them onto a Bitcoin standard one by one. And I think that might be like the wave of adoption by corporates. Instead of it being founder-led tech companies, it might just be private equity-run corporates.
That's true. Not many people are orange pilled, and having a lot of voting power makes a big difference. CJ, thank you. I wanted to open it up to the questions. If you guys have any, I'm going to turn the computer around in just a second. If you could hear him better. Oh. All right. All right, guys. Anyone you guys got any questions for CJ?
So I'm not too familiar with like MicroStrategy. I know I've heard a lot about them buying like a lot of Bitcoin, but like as a company, from what like you've been talking about, it seems like they're just trying to provide like a more conventional way to invest in Bitcoin. Is that what their main goal is as a company?
Yeah, would you say MicroStrategy's main goal is to give people a vehicle to invest in Bitcoin?
So I would say as a company, there are two strategies. The first strategy is the strategy that was there before the Bitcoin strategy as well, which is just the business intelligence part of the company, developing and selling enterprise software to different Fortune 500 companies, And that's a very robust, stable business that consistently generates cash flows. And that is part of the core strategy as well today. And second is the Bitcoin strategy, which is this active levered way of accumulating more Bitcoin on the balance sheet. So the pitch to a shareholder would be that as a shareholder, you're signing up for effectively both strategies. You're signing up for this enterprise software business that will generate cash flows, and you're signing up for Bitcoin on the balance sheet that is continuing to grow, and that's continuing to grow in a way where the Bitcoin per share is going up. So it's both strategies combined into one company.
Thanks, CJ. And you're talking about Bitcoin per share a lot. Do you look at it almost like, I know in the MBA finance courses, we're doing the net present values. And if it's a positive net present value, you're going to do the project no matter what. Do you guys, is it the calculus, if we have a chance to increase Bitcoin per share, we're going to go do that? Or is there any other thoughts going like, okay, when exactly are we going to dilute shareholders sometimes and buy more Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's exactly that. For capital allocation decisions at a traditional company, the question is, will the IRR of the project exceed the hurdle rate? Or another way of putting it, as you said, will the NPV of that investment be greater than zero? And that's what you think of when you look at an M&A, when you look at an organic investment into the business. And for MicroStrategy, yeah, it's not that. The way you think of it is that will the Bitcoin per share go up as a result of this transaction effectively? Like if you're going out into the market and issuing debt or issuing equity and you're buying Bitcoin with it, then what is the net effect on the Bitcoin per share, which is more accretive than the other? And hence you sort of build a strategy around this, and you figure out when do you want to go out into the capital markets, what type of liability do you want to issue, and what is the effect on the Bitcoin per share through doing all of this.
Does holding Bitcoin present any tax benefits to MicroStrategy?
So based on my understanding, it does not. The Bitcoin, as long as it's being held on the balance sheet and is not being sold, does not result in any capital gains and hence does not result in any capital gains tax. So there's no loss from holding it effectively up until you sell it. There will be some tax leakage, and there's no benefit either because again, none of it is being realized. None of the gains are being realized. None of the losses are being realized. So it's just sitting there on your balance sheet, and effectively there's no net effect on your tax outflows.
Do you know, are you familiar with the new accounting standard that's changing in December? And could you talk on that at all?
Yeah, so the accounting standard for Bitcoin on a corporate's balance sheet up until last year was this intangible impairment accounting. The idea was that if you buy Bitcoin at a certain price and then the price falls, then you have to record that loss effectively and hold the Bitcoin at that lower value on your balance sheet. If the price goes up, you're not allowed to mark it at the higher value. You can only basically keep marking it down at the lower value. But the sort of accounting treatment is being changed now after a lot of efforts by a lot of people in the industry in explaining and educating the regulators around how Bitcoin works and why it should not be treated in this sort of punitive manner. Now the FASB rules will be starting this year, it's optional, and I think January 2025 it becomes mandatory for every company to adopt the new accounting standard where it is just mark to market like any other asset for any other company, where if the price goes up, you mark it at the higher price. If the price goes down, you mark it at the lower price. And every quarter you do this. So yeah, that's a big change. What it does is it stops like muddying up the accounts for a company. Otherwise, it becomes tougher for shareholders, for analysts, for just the investor community to be able to segregate and understand what's happening in the business between the Bitcoin holdings and the regular operations and cash flows of the business. And now with the new accounting standards, it just becomes a lot easier for everyone to understand and everyone to value the company.
Yeah, it seems like serious investors would have taken that into account already, but there's got to be at least a bias, if at a minimal. I think that will
Yeah,
help.
you're right. I'll correct myself there that I guess, as you're saying, all serious investors would have being able to segregate and clean out the balance sheet or accounts themselves. And that is something that we've seen with MicroStrategy as well. But yeah, there would be some bias. There would be some, it also creates a hesitation for the company from adopting the strategy, because then they are worried about how their accounts are being treated and what are the different complexities that come from this accounting treatment. And then when it goes to a more favorable mark-to-market treatment, it just makes it easier for corporates to make the decision to adopt the strategy. And it might sort of help with the next leg of adoption, with corporates now being more amenable to copying, let's say, the MicroStrategy strategy.
Definitely. And guys, if you have any just general Bitcoin questions too, feel free. CJ's a mastermind over here. So well, we got him here. But I got one on MicroStrategy. So having the company, software company, positive cash flow, general business intelligence, how, I don't know if you are able to say or anything like that, but the calculus of deciding we're going to put more money in R&D or in our software side of the business versus, oh, we could put this money into Bitcoin, like determining the best use of funds. Is that something the treasury team does, or where does that decision get made?
Yeah, so that is a decision that I would say is made by the executive team, let's say the management team, the CEO, CFO, and there always is an opportunity to invest in different sort of functions within the core business. And that is a decision that is often made, and funds are invested into different projects, into different levers of growth for the core operations. But you also have the Bitcoin sort of opportunity. So different trade-offs over there, and the decision often is made by the executive team. But what I would point out is, for any software business with really high return metrics, the net effect of having a business with this kind of profile is that even if the company is growing fast, it just spits out so much cash and spits out so much cash flow each year that it sort of, you never sort of crunched for cash in terms of having to make a very tough decision between what you're going to do with the cash, which a lot of other companies might face when they have lower return metrics, when their cash flows are not that high relative to their just revenues or growth. So that's, at least for a software business, just a general trend is that you just have a lot more cash flow being churned out each year.
Can you touch on some of your projects this summer? I'm curious to hear what you worked on.
Sure, if I heard that correctly, just asking about the projects I've worked on over the summer at MicroStrategy.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was an interesting bunch of projects. I was effectively just supporting the capital markets and treasury team throughout the summer on effectively the capital market transactions. So right when I joined, we issued some convertible debt and bought Bitcoin with it. Then through the summer, we were also issuing equity through this ATM facility, which effectively means you are able to dribble down stock every day if you want, or every week, into the markets, raise equity, and then again buy Bitcoin with it. So I was doing this, but then I was also, in addition to that, helping with the Bitcoin advocacy work that Michael Saylor does and that the rest of the team also does. So that included primarily the Bitcoin conference that happened in Nashville, which is what is effectively the largest conference that happens once a year, organized by Bitcoin Magazine. I think they're hosting it in Vegas next year around the same time in the summer. But that happened bank center of my internship, which was just a great sort of timing and coincidence for me, because I got to support Michael Saylor with his presentation that he delivered, which was a very unique, in-depth presentation on what the Bitcoin price might be 21 years out in the future. But more importantly, with that larger Bitcoin price forecast, what could be the strategies that different people employ in terms of how to be on a Bitcoin standard if you are an individual, if you're a nation state, if you're a corporate. So effectively, a lot of technical hands-on modeling work was required for that presentation, which I got to do. And then we also open sourced that presentation, open sourced the Excel model as well. So it's basically published on GitHub. You can go online, download the Excel model, play around with the assumptions yourself, change the Bitcoin price predictions, change the strategy that the individual is using or the corporate is using, and see what the net result might be 10 years in the future, 20 years in the future. So the hope is that this becomes a tool that the community can use and can be a good way of orange pilling more people, making them understand how can Bitcoin really help. So that was the second big part of my internship, which I absolutely loved. Getting to interact with Michael, getting to interact with the team. Obviously, went down to Nashville as well, attended the conference, met Michael over there, met a bunch of other students in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And yeah, I would say those are broadly the two main areas that I worked on.
Did you get to touch at all the verification project they're talking about, the orange check type thing?
Yeah, so I didn't work on that. That is something that the software team or the software developers primarily work on. And as you'd understand, it's like very technical. While I did study engineering, I studied mechanical engineering. I tried to pursue a minor in computer science back in my undergrad days at uni, but I dropped that. So no, I didn't have much involvement or exposure to the more technical Bitcoin development work that is happening at MicroStrategy. It was mainly on the finance, capital markets, Bitcoin advocacy, the side of things.
Were you lucky enough to be on one of those teams where they'll send you sats for like being on time or stuff like that? Does everyone have like a lightning wallet?
Yeah, that is something that is integrated. Unfortunately, as an intern, I think I was not part of the program. So I never got to fully understand the nuts and bolts of how the program is implemented either. But I think it's a cool way. I think the fact that obviously Bitcoin allows you to store value for years and years and transfer that value from point A to point B instantaneously. What it also allows is these microtransactions, and it allows all of these unique implementations of those microtransactions in the context of a corporate and their employees, or also in a lot of other contexts. But yeah, unfortunately, I didn't firsthand experience what the program felt like.
Need to implement that for the Bitcoin Club, try to get more members.
Yeah.
We'll see.
What's the buying strategy like if you're able to talk on it? Is it speculative, like market timing, or more so dollar cost averaging? How would you characterize it if you could speak generally on it?
Yeah, I think dollar cost averaging, while it might not necessarily be very representative or accurate of the strategy, I think that's a good way of thinking of the strategy where if your belief as an individual or as a company is that the price of Bitcoin will continue to rise over the long term, then you're not worried about the short term volatility. And second, and more importantly, you're not trying to time the short term price movements either. So you're not taking a view that we think the price will go down in the next 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, or if it will go up. You just want to buy and hold forever. So as and when you have the opportunity to buy, you're going to buy, and you're not going to worry about the price swings of plus minus 10, 20, 30%, because again, you want to hold it forever. Or another way of thinking of it is also like if you just as an individual want to hold for greater than 5 years or 10 years, then I really don't think it matters if you're buying at 60,000 or you're buying at 50,000. Sure, there'll be some difference in the net returns for you as an individual, but you don't want to take the risk of staying out of the market and then the price moving against you, and then just having less Bitcoin compared to what you might have if you just bought it right then and there. And effectively similar or the same for MicroStrategy, where you're just kind of buying whenever you can. I think Michael Saylor has a famous quote on some maybe TV interview where he said that Bitcoin is the exit strategy and that he'll be buying the top forever. So the idea is that you're not worried from, accidentally buying it at the peak and then the price crashing 30, 50, 60%. Again, you want to hold it forever. So you're comfortable buying it at any price.
All right, I think you got one last question, or you got a question?
What's it like working with Michael?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was obviously, as you can imagine, super excited for someone who's been following him for the longest time and who was very deeply influenced by his work or his podcast appearances on a lot of different Bitcoin related things. I was super pumped to get to meet him. It all happened because of this conference where he needed some hands-on work. And it was great. It was a very surreal experience at first because it was almost as if I've heard him on so many different podcasts. This is now like having a private podcast with him where I was able to ask him questions which he could answer, given I was an employee at the company, which he could otherwise not say or share about MicroStrategy to a public audience. So things that are internal to the strategy of the company. So that was very cool, really hearing his deep wisdom on how he thinks about MicroStrategy as a company and the future of MicroStrategy as a company. And almost like it became a one-on-one podcast. But second, I think he's just the way he comes across online as well as online persona is he comes across as someone who's super wise, very well read, very knowledgeable, has all these beautiful analogies that he comes up with to describe Bitcoin and describe the ecosystem based on all the wisdom in different areas of his life. And it's just more of the same in person as well. Uh, I'll just add that he's also like extremely intense and focused in a good way. I think what you see with a lot of, not that I have personally had a lot of interaction with, let's say, super successful tech billionaire founders, but I think the common perception is that a lot of them share this sort of intensity. Their mind is always switched on. They're always thinking. The wheels are always turning in their head. And it kind of felt very similar having, every interaction with Michael, that he's always thinking about Bitcoin, the MicroStrategy strategy, always thinking about Bitcoin advocacy as well. So all in all, it was just an incredible experience for me to get to interact with him. I would have never thought that I would get to maybe 1 or 2 years ago. So very grateful for that.
Very cool.
Thank you.
All right, CJ, I wanted to know your favorite aspect about Bitcoin, why you love it so much, and then what concerns you the most or the biggest risk you see, if any.
Okay, that's a very interesting question and one that I've not thought of maybe deeply.
Yeah, put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's I love it. I think it changes, I think, as time passes by. What interests me about Bitcoin the most, through the initial Bitcoin rabbit hole journey, there was just so many aha moments, figuring out how it works, the computer science aspects behind it, the decentralized nature of it, you know, permissionless money, censorship resistant money, all these different ideas. But I think my favorite part of it is, I think it just opens up your mind in terms of just I think it teaches you on how to be curious and on how you should always look for the truth in different things. Because everyone thinks they kind of understand money, they kind of understand inflation, fiat, how the banking system works, but you never really understand it up until you truly understand Bitcoin, I feel, because that really forces you to figure out the system in detail. And then what that teaches you is that there might be a lot of different things in your life that you just take at face value, or a lot of things in life that you just assume are too complicated, so you can't really go down into the nitty-gritties of it and really understand for yourself how things work. So you just trust different things online, you trust different people, different experts, and just there's so much brainwashing that can happen through social media. But I think my favorite part of Bitcoin is just that the mental switch in wanting to be, more truth seeking. And on that also, just the idea of building a lower time preference. When you buy Bitcoin and you have the intent of holding it for many, many years, you've made that leap of thinking long term, of thinking of an investment over 10 years, 20 years. And that also is pervasive in a good way, where it influences your mentality in a lot of different things, where you again start making a lot of long term oriented decisions. So I love that aspect of it as well. So I just think the mental shift is my favorite part of Bitcoin. And the biggest risk with Bitcoin, I mean, I like to think there are none. Uh, but if I don't think that's a good answer. So the biggest risk, um, I think from a personal perspective, I think just Bitcoin custody is something I think of as a risk, where you always want to make sure that you have a good custody setup. Obviously, I think the initial journey for everyone is buying Bitcoin on a crypto exchange, leaving it on the crypto exchange. And as time and time again, you see crypto exchanges going bust, losing your Bitcoin, hacking, getting hacked, something happens, something goes wrong. So you don't want to leave it on exchange. You want to have it in your private custody. Then what is the right private custody setup? Single sig, multi sig, with a passphrase, without a passphrase, so many different hardware wallets. So I don't think it's very easy. I think there is some technical complexity over there, and everyone sort of keeps going through a journey of becoming more and more aware of the different things involved there. But for me personally, I think, yeah, the biggest risk is just I should not lose the Bitcoin I hold. And God forbid something happens to me, then my loved ones can access the Bitcoin. And it's not as if all of my savings just go to waste and no one can access them ever. That is what I would think is the biggest risk.
I like that a lot because it's definitely not trivial, but it's doable. It reminds me of how Matt Odell says, if you can drive a car, learn to drive a car, you can learn to hold your Bitcoin securely.
Yeah, and I think another Matt Odell saying is the way to know how early you were in Bitcoin is not by seeing how much Bitcoin you have today, but by seeing how much Bitcoin have you lost in that journey. Because I think things have become a lot easier now, at least from a UI perspective and technical complexity perspective, but it was a lot tougher 5 years earlier, a lot tougher 10 years earlier. So I think that just continues to become easier and easier. And so many entrepreneurs are working in the space around custody, multi-institutional custody, multi-sig custody, and it'll just become easier and easier. And I think 10 years later, the stuff that we use for custody will just be so drastically different compared to what we use today. So that's just a better growing trend throughout time, I think.
So true. Any final questions? All right, just thinking about it. No.
What is your future plan? Do you want to build some projects on base of your knowledge? Right? What do you want to do after MBA after that?
Yeah.
Want to make some start?
Yeah.
I'm
What's
sorry, I could not hear that very clearly. If you wouldn't mind repeating that, Michael, or
Yeah, I'll repeat it. She's asking you what your post MBA plan is. Are you trying to do a startup or what do you got in mind?
so my plan is to continue at MicroStrategy full time actually. So after the MBA, I intend to shift from Boston to DC and rejoin the team as a full-time employee. And I think my longer term aspiration is, I come from that ecosystem of finance, investing, private equity, and I have this deep sort of obsession with Bitcoin. I also, at some time in the future, want to return back to India, where I'm from, where my family is, where my friends are. So I think often about the best way of marrying that sort of interest and passion in Bitcoin, the expertise I'll get through MicroStrategy, and then also the understanding and knowledge of the private equity ecosystem in India, and marrying those two together in some way and making that magic work in India. I think there'll be copycats of MicroStrategy globally everywhere. Public companies, private companies, small companies, large companies. So I think everyone has a great way of, you don't necessarily need to be an entrepreneur in Bitcoin doing software development around Bitcoin or hardware stuff around Bitcoin. Any idea for any company at any scale can continue as is, and then you can just bolt on Bitcoin to that idea and that strategy, and it just makes it a more robust sort of company, a more robust startup. And that's the way I think of it, that I don't necessarily find myself drawn towards startups necessarily focused on Bitcoin, but I just find myself drawn towards the idea of bringing things to a Bitcoin standard and just continuing to play that. And I'm very excited to join MicroStrategy and then work on this full time.
Well, congratulations, CJ, and best of luck there with the Harvard Bitcoin scene.